I stood on my back porch, coffee mug steaming in the crisp morning air, watching the world unfold in a way that made my blood simmer. The sun was barely cresting over the green belt that bordered my property, casting long shadows across the koi pond I'd spent years perfecting. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, this backyard of mine, a quiet tribute to my late wife, Ellen, who loved nothing more than tending to her irises and watching the fish glide beneath the lily pads. But lately, it had become something else entirely, a freeway for entitled neighbors who didn't give a damn about boundaries or respect. And at the front of this parade of arrogance was Karen, the HOA president, waving at my security camera like she owned the place while her Great Dane dropped a steaming pile right in the middle of my pond's rock garden. This wasn't just a one-off annoyance. It was a daily assault, a relentless violation of everything I held dear. I'd moved to the suburban patch, a modest neighborhood called Willow Creek, because it promised peace. The real estate agent had sold me on the Green Belt, a protected strip of land that ran behind my property, untouchable by developers or meddling HOAs. It was supposed to be my buffer, my slice of solitude. The house itself was nothing fancy, a two-story craftsman with a wraparound porch, a decent-sized lot, and a backyard that Ellen and I had dreamed of turning into our own private Eden. After she passed, I poured myself into that yard, planting her favorite flowers, building the pond, and placing 6 whimsical garden gnomes around it, each one named, each one a story she'd told me over late-night glasses of wine. It was my way of keeping her close. But now, that sacred space was being trampled, and I wasn't about to let it slide. The trouble started a few months after I settled in. Willow Creek was one of those neighborhoods where every lawn was manicured to within an inch of its life, where mailboxes had to match and garbage cans couldn't be visible from the street. The HOA, led by Karen, ruled with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove of fake smiles and passive-aggressive newsletters. At first, I didn't mind. I kept my grass trimmed, paid my dues, and nodded politely at the monthly meetings. But then I noticed the joggers. 1 or 2 at first, cutting through my backyard to get to the trail that connected the green belt to the community park. I figured they were harmless, maybe just confused about the property lines. So I let it go, thinking they'd figure out the sidewalk route eventually. Big mistake. It wasn't long before the joggers turned into morning walkers, then dog walkers, then stroller moms chatting on their phones, oblivious to the fact that they were trampling my flower beds. By the time summer rolled around, my yard was seeing more traffic than the Starbucks down the road. Kids on scooters tore through, leaving ruts in the grass. Teenagers tossed soda cans onto my patio, one of them even giving a mocking salute to my security camera like he was starring in some TikTok prank video. And the dogs, God, the dogs. Unleashed and unapologetic, they chased squirrels, dug up my mulch, and left piles I had to clean up myself. I'd spent hours replanting irises only to find them crushed the next day, their delicate purple petals mashed into the dirt by careless feet. It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a desecration. I tried to be reasonable. I really did. I printed signs big, bold ones that read private property, no trespassing. Use the sidewalk. I staked them along the edge of my yard, thinking clarity would solve the problem. Karen tore them down. Not once, not twice, but 7 times. I caught her on camera the 3rd time, ripping the sign out of the ground with a smirk, tossing it into her golf cart like it was junk mail. The 7th time, she replaced my sign with one of her own, a pastel monstrosity that said, "Community Path, enjoy the walk." I couldn't believe the audacity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a power play. Karen and her HOA cronies had decided my land was theirs to claim, and they weren't even pretending to hide it. I confronted her at the next HOA meeting, held in the clubhouse that sat smugly at the edge of the green belt. The room smelled like stale coffee and cheap air freshener, and Karen was perched at the head of the table, sipping a latte and flipping through her agenda like a queen holding court. I stood up, survey documents in hand, and laid out the facts. My property was private, no easement existed, and the green belt trail was accessible via the sidewalk. She barely looked up. "Oh, that," she said, chuckling like I was some confused kid. "That path's been there forever. It's a community easement. It's in the plans." I slid the survey across the table, pointing to the clear boundary lines. No easement. No public access. Just my land. She shrugged, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Sometimes you just have to go with what works for everyone." Everyone, apparently, didn't include me. Her dismissal lit a fuse I didn't know I had. I'd always been a patient guy. Ellen used to tease me about how I'd wait out a traffic jam without so much as a sigh, but this was different. This was my home, my refuge, and it was being overrun by people who thought rules didn't apply to them. I filed a police report, hoping a little authority might set things straight. The officer who showed up was polite enough, a young guy named Officer Daniels who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I showed him the security footage, Karen's dog romping through my yard, kids cutting through my flower beds. That teenager with his soda can salute. Daniels nodded, scribbled a few notes, and then gave me the line I'd come to dread. "Looks like a civil issue." Even as Karen's Great Dane chased a squirrel past my porch in the background. "Try fencing it off," he suggested, as if I hadn't already considered that. So I built a fence. Not a flimsy picket job, but a 6-foot wooden barrier, sturdy and stained to match the house. It went up in a weekend, and for about 3 days, I thought I'd won. Then the climbers showed up. Kids scaled it like it was a playground. Adults stepped over it, some even bringing stools to make it easier. I added more signs, this time bolted to the fence. They laughed, spray-painted HOA rules on one, and kept coming. I tried talking to them, figuring a face-to-face might appeal to their better nature. I caught Karen one morning, leading her walking group through my yard like a tour guide. "This is private property," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You're trespassing." She rolled her eyes, her yoga pants gleaming in the sunlight. "Don't take it personally, Han. We're just trying to enjoy the neighborhood." Then she had the gall to suggest I let her group use my backyard shed as a shade rest stop. I told her no, flat out. She called me the anti-fun guy and marched off, her posse giggling behind her. That was when I knew reason wasn't going to work. These people didn't respond to logic or decency. They responded to power, and Karen wielded it like a scepter. She wasn't just ignoring my rights, she was rewriting the rules to suit her. The HOA wasn't a governing body, it was her personal fan club, and my backyard was the latest stage for her performance. I could have lawyered up, dragged this through court, but that would have taken years and more money than I cared to spend. Besides, Karen would have loved the drama, spinning it into some sob story about the grumpy widower ruining her perfect community. I needed something else, something that would hit her where it hurt, her pride. The final straw came on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd been at the hardware store, picking up mulch to repair the latest damage to my flower beds. When I got home, I noticed something off. The gnomes, Ellen's gnomes, were gone. Not just moved, but shattered. 6 little figures, each one hand-painted with a name and a story, lay in pieces around the koi pond. A soccer ball sat nearby, scuffed and abandoned. I heard laughter from the green belt and saw a kid running off, his backpack bouncing. Karen was there too, lounging on a lawn chair just feet away, scrolling on her phone. I walked over, holding one of the broken gnomes, its tiny hat cracked in half. "This is my yard," I said, my voice shaking. "Not a playground." She glanced up, barely registering the damage. "You shouldn't put breakables where kids play," she said, then went back to her phone. I stood there, the weight of her words sinking in. Where kids play? My yard. My home. The place where I'd scattered Ellen's ashes, where I'd planted every flower with her memory in mind. It wasn't just trespassing anymore. It was war. And I wasn't about to let Karen and her flip-flop army win it with their entitlement and their lattes. I didn't say another word. I turned around, walked back to my house, and locked the door. That night, I sat in my workshop, a glass of whiskey sweating on the table, and started sketching. I wasn't going to fight them with lawyers or shouting matches. I was going to build something they couldn't ignore, something they couldn't climb over or talk their way through. I was going to turn my backyard into a battlefield, and I was going to do it my way. The idea came to me as I traced the outline of my property on a blueprint. I'd spent years in logistics, planning supply chains and movement layouts, including a stint in Kandahar where I'd helped design operational grids for desert bases. If I could outsmart insurgents in a war zone, I could damn well outsmart Karen and her yoga walkers. The plan wasn't just about stopping them, it was about making them regret ever stepping foot on my land. I didn't want a fence or a gate. I wanted something that would confuse, frustrate, and humble them without ever breaking a single law. I wanted a maze. Not just any maze, mind you. This would be a masterpiece of psychological warfare, a homeowner's version of a tactical obstacle course. It would be legal, it would be beautiful, and it would be relentless. I'd use hedges, lights, sounds, and a few tricks I'd picked up over the years to create a labyrinth that would trap their egos and spit them out on the other side, wet, disoriented, and defeated. I could already picture Karen, her sunglasses slipping down her nose, shouting into the bushes as she realized she'd been outplayed. The thought made me smile for the first time in weeks. I started small, researching hedge varieties that were dense, fast-growing, and tall enough to block sight lines. I called a buddy who ran a nursery outside town and ordered a truckload of privet shrubs, pre-cultivated to 4 feet high. I didn't tell him the full plan, just that I was redoing the backyard. He didn't ask questions, which was fine by me. I also ordered lattice panels, iron posts, and a few rolls of wiring for the tech I had in mind. The motion-activated sprinklers were a no-brainer. I'd seen them in action at a friend's farm, soaking trespassing deer with pinpoint accuracy. I'd need cameras, too, discreet ones, hidden in birdhouses or fake rocks. And sound. That was the key. I wanted them to hear their own arrogance echoed back, to feel like the maze was alive and mocking them. I spent nights in my workshop, sketching layouts and timing circuits. The maze wouldn't be static. It would shift, adapt, and disorient. I drew inspiration from military movement grids, the kind used to funnel enemies into kill zones without them realizing they were trapped. There'd be loops that felt like progress, but led nowhere, dead ends with surprises, and one true exit that changed every few hours. I'd use hinges on some panels to create rotating paths, solar-powered actuators to keep it low maintenance, and scent trails to throw off the dogs. The centerpiece would be a clearing with a speaker that played a single message on loop. Congratulations, you're lost. It was petty, sure, but it was also poetic. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not even my closest neighbor, a retired teacher named Angela who'd always been kind. I didn't want leaks, didn't want Karen catching wind and rallying her clipboard warriors before I was ready. I worked in the early mornings, before the joggers showed up, and late at night, when the neighborhood was asleep. I told curious passersby I was landscaping, and they nodded approvingly, assuming I was finally caving to HOA pressure to beautify the yard. They had no idea what was coming. Karen kept up her routine, strutting through my yard with her coffee mug and her posse, oblivious to the storm brewing. She'd wave at my camera, sometimes blowing a kiss, as if daring me to do something. Her Great Dane, Brutus, had taken to marking the same corner of my pond every morning, a ritual that felt like a middle finger. The kids kept coming, too, their scooters tearing up what was left of my grass. One afternoon, I caught a teenager spray painting Karen's path on my fence. I didn't clean it off. I left it there, a reminder of what I was up against. Every infraction fueled me. Every trespass added another layer to the plan. By the time I was ready to start building, I'd mapped out every inch of the maze in my head. It would cover the back third of my lot, about a quarter acre, with the koi pond and Ellen's flower beds safely outside its borders. The entrance would be subtle, blending with the green belt so trespassers wouldn't realize they were stepping into a trap until it was too late. The hedges would form 3 levels of looping paths, each one designed to mislead and disorient. I'd use reflective surfaces to create optical illusions, sound emitters to play tricks on their ears, and sprinklers to hit them when they least expected it. The tech was simple but precise, calibrated to maximize frustration without causing harm. I wasn't a monster. I just wanted them to learn. I hired a couple of tech-savvy kids from across town to help with the wiring. They thought it was a prank, some kind of elaborate art project. "Is this for a movie?" one of them asked, soldering a motion sensor to a speaker. I grinned. "It's performance art." They didn't need to know the truth. They worked fast, kept their mouths shut, and didn't ask for much, just a few bucks and some pizza. By the time they were done, the maze was wired for sound, light, and chaos. The final piece was the control room. I converted my upstairs study, a small space with a view of the backyard, into a command center. I mounted monitors on the walls, each one tied to a camera feed. I could see every turn, every hedge, every inch of the maze from my desk. I added a joystick to control the sprinklers manually if I felt like it, though most of the system was automated. A laptop ran the timing circuits, randomizing the exit path every 90 minutes. I even set up a microphone to record ambient noise, just in case I wanted to add custom audio later. It wasn't just a maze, it was a machine, and I was the engineer. When the hedges arrived, I had them delivered at dawn to avoid prying eyes. The driver didn't ask questions, just unloaded the pallets and drove off. I spent the next 3 days planting, staking, and trimming, my hands blistered, but my resolve ironclad. The lattice panels went up next, painted forest green to blend with the shrubs. I buried the iron posts deep, ensuring no one could push through with brute force. By the time I was done, the maze looked like a garden from the outside, lush, inviting, almost quaint. But inside, it was a beast, ready to swallow anyone foolish enough to enter. I tested it myself, walking the paths at midnight with a flashlight. It worked better than I'd hoped. The loops were disorienting, the reflections threw me off, and the sprinklers caught me twice before I figured out their timing. I stood in the central clearing, listening to the speaker's looped message, and laughed out loud. It was perfect. Karen didn't stand a chance. The morning I finished, I sat on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the joggers approach. They didn't notice the new hedges, didn't see the faint glow of the LED stakes I'd planted along the paths. Karen came by an hour later, her sunglasses perched on her head, her coffee mug emblazoned with Queen in rhinestones. She glanced at the maze, smirked, and said, "Oh, a garden maze. How quaint." I smiled back, sipping my coffee. Something like that. She had no idea what she was walking into. The shortcut she'd claimed as her own was about to become the most unforgettable detour of her life. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The maze would do the talking for me, and it was going to speak loud and clear. The whiskey glass sat on my workshop table, sweating beads of condensation onto the blueprint I'd been sketching for weeks. The amber liquid caught the dim glow of the desk lamp, casting a faint shadow across the intricate lines and annotations that mapped out my backyard's transformation. This wasn't just a landscaping project, it was a declaration of war, a meticulously engineered middle finger to Karen and her HOA posse who'd turned my private sanctuary into their personal shortcut. I leaned back in my chair, the creak of old wood grounding me as I stared at the plans. The maze was no longer a vague idea, it was taking shape, piece by piece, in my mind and on paper. And it was going to be a masterpiece of passive-aggressive genius, a labyrinth that would trap their egos, soak their pride, and send them stumbling back to the sidewalk where they belonged. I'd spent years in logistics, plotting supply chains and movement grids under pressure, most notably in Kandahar, where I'd helped design operational layouts for desert bases. If I could outmaneuver insurgents in a war zone, redirecting supply convoys through hostile territory, I could damn well outsmart a suburban HOA president with a latte addiction and a god complex. Karen thought she was untouchable, waving at my security cameras like a B-list celebrity, her Great Dane defiling my koi pond while her followers trampled Ellen's irises. She'd underestimated me, and that was her first mistake. Her second was assuming I'd keep playing nice. I was done with signs, done with police reports, done with her smug community easement nonsense. This maze was my answer, and it was going to hit her where it hurt, her inflated sense of control. The concept was simple but brutal, a tactical-grade obstacle course disguised as a garden. It wouldn't just stop trespassers, it would disorient them, frustrate them, and make them question their life choices without ever crossing the line into illegality. I wanted Karen to walk in expecting a shortcut and come out drenched, confused, and humbled. I wanted her yoga walkers to scream in frustration as they hit dead ends that echoed their own self-righteous chatter. I wanted the kids on scooters to rethink their bravado when they tripped motion sensors and got sprayed with lavender-scented water. This wasn't about physical harm. I wasn't a monster. It was about psychological warfare, about teaching a lesson they'd never forget. And I had the skills to make it happen. I started with the layout, sketching a grid inspired by urban military simulations. In Kandahar, we'd used similar patterns to funnel threats into controlled zones, creating loops that felt like progress but led nowhere. My maze would do the same, but instead of insurgents, it would trap entitled neighbors. The design called for 3 levels of winding paths, each one a psychological trap. The outer layer would lure them in with a deceptively open entrance, blending seamlessly with the green belt so they wouldn't realize they were on my land until it was too late. The middle layer would introduce confusion, false exits, reflective surfaces, and subtle audio cues to throw off their sense of direction. The inner layer was the heart of the beast, a series of tight loops and dead ends, rigged with sprinklers and speakers to maximize chaos. Only one true exit would exist, and it would change every 90 minutes, controlled by a randomized timing circuit I'd build myself. The materials were the next hurdle. I needed hedges, dense, tall, and fast-growing, to form the walls. After some research, I settled on privet shrubs, known for their thick foliage and ability to withstand heavy pruning. I called my buddy Tom, who ran a nursery 30 miles out of town, and ordered a truckload of pre-cultivated privets, each one 4 feet high and ready to plant. "Big landscaping job?" Tom asked, his voice crackling over the phone. "Something like that," I said, keeping it vague. He didn't press, just promised delivery at dawn to avoid nosy neighbors. I also ordered lattice panels for additional barriers, painted forest green to blend with the greenery. Iron posts would anchor the structure, buried deep to prevent anyone from pushing through. The tech was trickier. Motion-activated sprinklers, discrete cameras, sound emitters, and low-voltage actuators for the moving parts. I sourced most of it online, using a mix of home security suppliers and obscure electronics retailers to keep my purchases under the radar. The sprinklers were my pride and joy. I'd seen them in action at a friend's farm where they'd kept deer at bay with surgical precision. I ordered a dozen, each one programmable to trigger with a 1-second delay, ensuring the last person in a group got the worst of it. The water would be infused with a harmless mix of lavender and vinegar, pleasant enough to avoid complaints, but pungent enough to ruin Karen's yoga pants. The cameras were next, small enough to hide in fake rocks and birdhouses, wired to a central hub in my upstairs study. I wanted eyes on every inch of the maze, not just for security, but for the satisfaction of watching Karen's meltdown in real time. The sound emitters were the final touch, tiny speakers capable of playing custom audio triggered by motion sensors. I had plans for those clips of Karen's voice from HOA meetings, looped phrases like "this isn't up to code," to haunt her as she wandered. The tech wasn't cheap, but I wasn't cutting corners. This was an investment in peace, in reclaiming what was mine. I hired 2 kids from across town, Jake and Ethan, a pair of tech-savvy teenagers who'd done some wiring for a neighbor's home theater. They were perfect, skilled, discreet, and too young to care about HOA gossip. I brought them over one evening, showed them the blueprint, and watched their eyes light up. "Is this for a movie set?" Jake asked, soldering a sensor to a speaker. I grinned. It's performance art. They didn't need the full story, and I didn't offer it. They worked fast, running wires through the lattice panels and testing the sprinklers with gleeful precision. By the time they were done, the maze was alive with hidden tech, ready to spring into action at the first trespasser. The control room was my command center, a converted study on the second floor with a clear view of the backyard. I mounted 4 monitors on the wall, each tied to a camera feed. A laptop ran the timing circuits, randomizing the exit path and logging every motion sensor trigger. I added a joystick for manual sprinkler control, though the system was mostly automated. A microphone sat on the desk, ready to record ambient noise or custom audio if I felt creative. The room felt like a war room, and in a way, it was. I wasn't just building a maze, I was orchestrating a campaign, and Karen was the target. The Hedges arrived at 5 a.m. on a Tuesday, the delivery truck rumbling quietly down the street. I timed it to avoid the morning joggers, and the driver, a burly guy named Carl, didn't ask questions. He unloaded the pallets, shook my hand, and drove off, leaving me with a forest of privets ready to plant. I spent the next 3 days in the dirt, my hands blistered and my back aching, but every shrub I staked felt like a small victory. The lattice panels went up next, secured with hinges for the rotating paths. I buried the iron posts deep, using a post hole digger that left me soaked in sweat. The sprinklers were installed last, calibrated to cover every major path with overlapping arcs of water. I tested them at midnight, laughing as I got drenched tweaking the timing. The audio system was trickier. I wanted it to be subtle but unnerving, like the maze was alive. I hid the speakers in decorative birdhouses and fake rocks, wiring them to motion sensors that triggered at specific points. I'd recorded clips from HOA meetings, Karen's voice droning about community standards or resale values, and set them to play at dead ends. One speaker in the central clearing looped a single message: "Congratulations, you're lost." It was petty, but it was perfect. I added ambient sounds too, faint whispers, chirps, the sound of footsteps just out of sight, to keep trespassers on edge. The dogs were another consideration. Karen's Great Dane was a repeat offender, so I sprayed harmless scent trails, citronella and peppermint, to throw off their noses. One trail led to the clearing, ensuring Brutus would drag Karen straight into the heart of the maze. The lighting was the final touch. I installed LED garden stakes that glowed faintly at night, each color a lie. Blue meant a dead end, yellow looped back to the start, and green promised progress, but always led to a confusion zone. It wasn't strictly necessary. Most trespassers came during the day, but it added to the illusion, making the maze feel alive even when I wasn't watching. I walked the paths myself, testing every turn, every sensor, every trick. It was disorienting even for me, and I'd built the damn thing. The loops felt endless, the reflections threw off my sense of direction, and the sprinklers caught me twice before I memorized their pattern. Standing in the clearing, listening to the speaker's mocking message, I knew I'd created something unstoppable. The legal side was another priority. I wasn't about to let Karen twist this into a violation. I called a lawyer friend, Mike, who laughed for 10 minutes when I explained the plan. "You're a mad genius," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "It's legal as long as you post warnings and don't cause harm." He helped me draft a sign: "Landscaping under maintenance. Enter at your own risk." It was laminated, bolted to the entrance, and airtight. Mike gave it a thumbs up and told me to call if the HOA tried anything. I also checked the property survey again, confirming no easement existed. My land was mine, and the maze was my right. The construction took 2 weeks, every moment fueled by the memory of Karen's smirk, her dog's messes, and the shattered gnomes. I worked in the early mornings and late nights, avoiding the neighborhood's prying eyes. To anyone watching, I was just a guy fixing up his yard. I told curious neighbors different stories: a privacy hedge, a therapeutic garden for Ellen, an experiment in permaculture. They nodded, assuming I was finally playing ball with the HOA's aesthetic demands. Karen walked by twice during the build, her sunglasses perched like a crown. "Oh, a garden maze," she said, smirking. "How quaint." I smiled back, my hands dirty from planting. "Something like that." She had no idea the hedges in front of her were about to become her personal hell. The maze was a beast, but it was beautiful. From the outside, it looked like a lush garden, the privets trimmed to perfection, the lattice panels blending seamlessly with the greenery. The entrance was subtle, a gap in the hedges that invited trespassers to step in without realizing they were crossing a line. Inside, it was a different story, a labyrinth of loops, dead ends, and surprises, all wired to confuse and conquer. The cameras caught every angle, the sprinklers were primed, and the speakers waited to spring their traps. I stood on my upstairs balcony the morning it was finished, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over my creation. It looked peaceful, almost inviting. But it was a predator and Karen was the prey. I didn't have to wait long. The joggers came first, oblivious to the new hedges. They stepped in, expecting their usual shortcut, and hit the first loop. I watched from the control room, the monitors flickering as they turned back, confused. The sprinklers caught one guy in the back, and he yelped, shaking his head like a wet dog. I didn't laugh, not yet. I was saving that for Karen. She showed up an hour later, her coffee mug gleaming, her posse trailing behind. She glanced at the maze, tossed her hair, and strode in like she owned it. I leaned forward, my finger hovering over the sprinkler override. The game was on, and I was ready to play. The morning sun spilled over the hedges, casting dappled shadows across the maze that now stood as a silent sentinel in my backyard. I sat in my upstairs control room, the monitors flickering with live feeds from every corner of the labyrinth. The air smelled of coffee and vengeance, and I couldn't help but grin as I sipped from my mug. The maze was ready, weeks of planning, planting, and wiring had culminated in a botanical beast designed to humble Karen and her HOA cronies. They trampled my land, mocked my signs, and shattered Ellen's gnomes, but today, the tables were turning. This wasn't just a defense, it was a reckoning, and I was about to watch it unfold in glorious, high-definition chaos. The first test came early, before Karen's usual strut. A jogger, some guy in neon spandex who'd been cutting through my yard for months, approached the maze's entrance. He didn't even hesitate, stepping into the gap between the privet hedges like it was just another day. The cameras caught his confident stride, then his confusion as he hit the first loop. He turned left, then right, then left again, his head swiveling as the path doubled back on itself. A reflective panel threw his own image back at him, and he froze, muttering something I couldn't hear. Then the sprinklers kicked in a light mist of lavender and vinegar that hit him square in the chest. He yelped, flailing as he slipped on the mulch and stumbled out the side exit, dripping and cursing. I didn't laugh, but I felt a spark of satisfaction. The maze worked. Now it was time for the main event. Karen arrived at 9:07 a.m., her sunglasses perched like a crown, her queen bedazzled coffee mug glinting in the sunlight. Her posse trailed behind, 3 women in matching yoga pants, clutching iced lattes and chatting about HOA fines like it was a sport. Brutus, her Great Dane, loped alongside, his leash dangling loosely as he sniffed the air. Karen glanced at the maze, smirked, and tossed her hair. "This is adorable," she announced, loud enough for me to hear through the open window. "I'm sure it'll help resale values. People love a touch of whimsy." She tossed her coffee cup into my recycling bin, another deliberate jab, and led her group into the maze like she was walking a red carpet. I leaned forward, my finger hovering over the sprinkler override. Showtime. The monitors lit up as they crossed the entrance. Karen took the lead, her stride confident, her voice carrying over the cameras. "He thinks this'll stop us," she said, laughing. "It's just a few bushes." Her friends nodded, their phones out, probably snapping photos for the neighborhood app. They hit the first loop without noticing, the hedges guiding them into a gentle curve that felt like progress. Then the path split, and Karen chose left, straight into a confusion zone. A reflective panel caught her off guard, mirroring her own smug expression back at her. She stopped, frowned, and turned right, only to hit a dead end. The speaker hidden in a birdhouse triggered, playing a clip of her own voice from an HOA meeting. This isn't up to code. Her head snapped up, her eyes darting around. What the hell? She muttered. Her friends weren't faring much better. One, a woman in a pink tracksuit, tried to follow Karen, but hit a rotating panel that swung shut behind her, redirecting her into a loop of her own. She shouted, "Karen, where are you?" But the maze's acoustics bounced her voice back, louder and distorted. The third woman, trailing with Brutus, stepped into a scent trail I'd laid for the dog. The citronella hit his nose, and he bolted, dragging her into a bottleneck where the sprinklers waited. The mist hit them both, soaking her yoga pants and turning Brutus into a soggy mess. She screamed, flailing as the lavender vinegar mix clung to her skin. Karen, meanwhile, was on her fourth pass by the same hedge, her sunglasses slipping as she muttered about shoddy landscaping. I watched stone-faced as the chaos unfolded. Karen's confidence crumbled with every wrong turn. She shouted directions to her friends, but the maze swallowed her words, sending them back as echoes. One of her followers tried to climb a hedge, only to land in a mulch trap that triggered a camera flash and a rooster screech. She shrieked, tumbling backward, her phone skidding across the ground. Karen, now visibly flustered, yelled, "This is harassment," into the bushes, as if the maze could hear her. I triggered the central speaker, letting it loop. "Congratulations, you're lost." Her face twisted, part rage, part disbelief, as she realized she was trapped in my game. It took 25 minutes for Karen to find the side exit. She emerged panting, her white tracksuit streaked with purple dye from the sprinklers, her hair plastered to her forehead. Her friends stumbled out behind her, dripping and disheveled, Brutus whining at their heels. Karen pointed a trembling finger at my house and shouted, "You'll regret this." I stepped onto the porch, lemonade in hand, and waved. "Have a refreshing day," I said, my voice calm but laced with steel. She stormed off, her posse scrambling to keep up, and I knew Phase 2 was complete. The maze wasn't just functional, it was personal, and Karen had just tasted defeat. The fallout was immediate and glorious. By noon, my inbox was flooded with messages from neighbors. Most were laughing emojis or cryptic notes like, "Heard someone got wet today." A few asked if they could walk the maze, curious about the new garden. The neighborhood app exploded with chatter, none of it naming Karen directly, but everyone knowing exactly who'd been humbled. Someone posted a blurry photo of her soaked tracksuit, captioned, "Shortcut gone wrong." I didn't need to say a word, the maze had spoken for itself, and the story was spreading like wildfire. Karen, predictably, didn't slink away quietly. She was too proud, too entrenched in her HOA throne to admit defeat. By evening, she'd called an emergency board meeting, slapping my name on the agenda like a wanted poster. The email arrived at 6:32 p.m. with the official HOA header and a watermark of an eagle that screamed overcompensating. Community disruption and nuisance complaint. Subject, Mr. Stephen Callahan. It read, accusing me of alleged acts of aggression via landscaping. I printed it out, highlighted the phrase, and taped it to the maze's entrance. If trespassers wanted to keep coming, they'd know exactly what they were walking into. The meeting was a circus, and I dressed for the occasion. I walked in wearing a t-shirt I had printed the night before. I survived the HOA maze. The room was packed, folding chairs crammed with Karen's loyalists, clipboard warriors, and nosy neighbors munching on store-bought danishes. Karen stood at the front, a prosecutor in her own mind, clutching a stack of photos like evidence in a murder trial. One showed her covered in purple dye, mid-shriek. Another caught her friend mid-jump over a hedge, looking like a failed Olympian. He has intentionally created a psychological hazard, she barked, pointing to the photos. This structure disorients residents and poses a safety risk to children, seniors, and small dogs. The room was silent, except for a chuckle from the back. Karen spun toward it, her glare lethal, but the laughter spread. Dennis, a board member who always looked half asleep, raised a hand. So, just to be clear, you were trespassing on his land? Karen's nostrils flared. It's been used as a common path for years, she insisted. He can't just turn it into a trap. That's when I stood up, walked to the front, and dropped a folder on the table. It contained the property survey, zoning laws, and a notarized letter from the county confirming no easement existed. I added a laminated list of trespassing incidents, each one dated and tied to my security footage. The names of Karen and her followers were highlighted in bold. The room went still. Karen snatched the papers, her eyes scanning furiously, then looked up. But people are used to going through there, she said, her voice weaker. It was her only defense, habit, entitlement, the audacity of thinking custom trumped law. Miriam, a retired judge on the board, leaned forward. Used to doing something illegal doesn't make it legal, she said. I once had a guy argue he shouldn't get a DUI because he drank at the same bar every night. Guess how that turned out? Laughter rippled through the room, even from Dennis. Karen's smile cracked, and for a moment, I almost felt bad. Almost. She tried one last move, flipping her phone toward me with an email draft open. You'll be hearing from our attorney, she warned. This is an HOA-backed demand letter. I shrugged. Good. My attorney needs a new dartboard. The room erupted, and Karen's face turned the color of her dyed tracksuit. She stormed out, vowing to take this further, but the damage was done. The board was split, and her credibility was crumbling. That night, I poured a whiskey and settled into the control room. The footage from Karen's maze run was gold, 25 minutes of her shouting, slipping, and unraveling. I edited it into a tight compilation, uploaded it to Reddit under a burner account, and titled it Karen vs. Tactical Garden Maze. She loses. By morning, it had thousands of upvotes, cross-posted to our /public freakout and our /HOA fails. Comments poured in. Maze Daddy strikes again. This guy's a genius. Please add a fog machine. I got DMs offering everything from sponsorships to requests for the maze's blueprints as NFTs. I declined them all. This wasn't about money, it was about principle. Karen wasn't done, of course. The next day, she showed up with the local news crew, standing in front of my hedges with dramatic lighting and a rehearsed speech. We're here where one man's obsession has disrupted an entire community, she said, gesturing wildly. This hedge maze is a menace. I stepped outside just as the reporter turned to me. Sir, would you like to comment on allegations you've weaponized your landscaping? I gave a tight-lipped smile. Weaponized? You mean by growing plants on my own land? The reporter pressed, glancing at Karen. They say people are getting trapped. I shrugged. If someone walks into a puzzle and doesn't know it's a puzzle, maybe the puzzle isn't the problem. The cameraman stifled a grin, and Karen stormed off. The news segment aired that evening, meant to be neutral but edited like a comedy. Karen's purple-streaked meltdown played on loop, my quote about puzzles stealing the show. It went viral, spawning memes of Karen in the shining hedge maze and TikTok dances parodying her shouts. Her influence cratered. Neighbors who'd once feared her started waving at me. Kids left crayon notes by the maze calling it the best ever. The board proposed term limits for HOA leadership, and it passed overwhelmingly. Karen didn't show at the next meeting, sending a resignation letter citing a toxic environment. Someone doodled mazes on the copies left at the clubhouse. The maze became a community fixture. I offered weekend walkthroughs, and kids loved it, giggling at the rooster screeches. Retirees came to see the fuss, and I added trivia signs about local plants and HOA history. It wasn't just a trap anymore, it was a symbol of standing your ground with creativity and grit. Karen had tried to control everything, but I'd redirected the game, and now it belonged to the neighborhood. She was gone, her reign over, and I was just getting started. The spring air settled over Willow Creek like a long-awaited exhale, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming azaleas. For the first time since I'd moved here, the neighborhood felt alive, not with the tense, artificial order of Karen's HOA regime, but with a genuine sense of ease. The streets were quieter, not because people stayed inside, but because the shouting had stopped. No more HOA patrols scribbling passive-aggressive notes about lawn edges or mailbox colors. No more clipboard warriors measuring hedges with rulers. Karen's resignation hadn't just been a change in leadership. It was as if a toxin had been flushed from the system, leaving behind a community that could finally breathe. And at the heart of it all was my maze, no longer just a tool of revenge, but a living symbol of what happens when you stand your ground with creativity and grit. I stood in my backyard, pruning shears in hand, trimming an overgrown privet hedge as the morning sun warmed my shoulders. The maze had evolved since its debut, its paths now lined with solar-powered fairy lights that glowed softly at dusk, transforming it from ominous to enchanting. I'd added new touches, motion-activated voice clips that whispered "good luck" or "turn back while you can," delighting the kids who ran through on weekends. The sprinklers still worked their magic, but I'd tweaked the scent to a milder lavender, less about punishment now and more about surprise. The central clearing, once a trap for Karen's ego, now held a stone bench beneath the oak tree. Its carved message, "Respect is the only real shortcut," a quiet reminder of the lesson this whole saga had taught. The maze wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the neighborhood, a testament to what happens when you fight back without losing your soul. The transformation wasn't just physical. The maze had become a community touchstone, a place where people gathered not out of obligation, but out of curiosity and joy. Kids called it the backyard labyrinth, and someone, nobody knew who, had pinned it on Google Maps as "Escape from Karen." I didn't create the pin, but I let it stay, its irony too perfect to remove. Neighbors who'd once avoided me, wary of Karen's influence, now waved as they passed my house. Some left handwritten notes near the entrance, scrawled in crayon with messages like "Best maze ever" or "Karen got owned." I didn't respond publicly, but each morning, as I checked the pressure sensors and watered the hedges, I found myself smiling. I hadn't just built a deterrent, I'd created something that brought people together, something that healed the fractures Karen's reign had left behind. The maze's fame grew beyond Willow Creek. The Reddit video I'd posted, Karen's purple-streaked meltdown set to circus music, had racked up millions of views, spawning memes and parodies across platforms. TikTok creators made dance videos mimicking her shouts into the bushes, and someone edited her into a clip from The Shining, lost in a hedge maze with Jack Nicholson's grin. I got DMs from strangers offering everything from sponsorships to requests to franchise the maze as a tourist attraction. One guy even asked if I'd sell the blueprints as NFTs, which I politely declined. This wasn't about fame or money. It was about principle, about reclaiming my space and showing Karen that her rules didn't trump respect. But the real impact was closer to home. One Saturday morning, as I adjusted a sprinkler timer, a woman approached with a young boy in tow. She introduced herself as Lisa, a new resident from 2 blocks away. Her son, Adam, had autism and loved patterns and puzzles. She explained that he'd heard about the maze from other kids and had become obsessed, drawing its paths in his notebook every night. Lisa was cautious, unsure if it was okay to ask, but she wondered if Adam could walk through. "It's no trouble at all," I said, gesturing to the entrance. Adam's eyes lit up as he stepped in, pausing at each turn to tap the hedges, smiling when a speaker chirped wrong way, and giggling at the rooster screech near the old mulch trap. Lisa stood beside me, tears brimming as she watched. "You could have just put up a wall," she said softly. "Most people would have. But you made something better." Her words hit harder than any viral video or HOA defeat. The maze had become more than a weapon. It was a gift, a space where a kid like Adam could find wonder in a world that often overwhelmed him. That moment shifted something in me. Revenge had driven me to build the maze, but its purpose had grown larger. It wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about showing what's possible when you channel anger into creation. I started hosting guided walkthroughs on weekends, letting kids and adults explore the paths. I added trivia signs along the routes, with questions about local plants, community history, and even ironic quotes from old HOA newsletters. People brought picnic lunches, turning the maze into a destination. One retiree, a gruff guy named Harold who'd once backed Karen, admitted over lemonade that he'd been wrong about me. "You didn't just win," he said. "You changed the game." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The maze had done what no lawsuit or shouting match ever could. It rewrote the narrative. Karen, meanwhile, was a fading shadow. Word spread that she'd moved to a development across town, one without an HOA, a poetic twist that made me chuckle. She tried starting a community Facebook group there, but the residents, wise to her brand of control, kicked her out after 3 posts. An anonymous postcard arrived at my house one day, a picture of a hedge on the front and the words "Still can't find my way out" scrawled on the back. No return address, but I had a good guess who sent it. Karen's defeat wasn't just personal. It was public, etched into the neighborhood's memory and the internet's endless archive. She tried to break the rules, but I'd rewritten the game, and she'd lost on every front. The maze's legacy took an unexpected turn when a formal envelope arrived from the county. I braced myself, half expecting Karen's final jab, but it was an invitation. The maze had gone so viral that it caught the attention of a state committee on community innovation. They wanted to present me with a Community Engagement Award for transformative conflict resolution through creative architecture. I laughed at the wording, petty revenge turned civic ingenuity, but there it was, in black and white. The ceremony was small, held at the county courthouse, but the local paper covered it, interviewing neighbors about the HOA's fallout and the neighborhood's newfound unity. They called it "the maze that changed everything," a cheesy headline I couldn't deny. My name wasn't the star, but my quote, "Respect isn't negotiable," made the front page. The attention brought new opportunities. I hosted a fundraiser in the maze, with proceeds going to a local shelter. Families paid a small fee to walk through, kids squealing as sprinklers caught them off guard. We raised over $4,000, and a city council member showed up with her son, who declared the maze 10 times better than Minecraft. High praise from a 10-year-old. I kept refining the maze, rotating hedge panels, upgrading sprinkler timers, and adding a speaker at the exit that played a triumphant chime when someone made it through. I called it the victory chime, a small flourish that felt right. The fairy lights multiplied, turning the maze into a glowing wonderland at night, and I caught neighbors sneaking photos from the green belt, their faces lit with awe. But the maze's true power wasn't in its lights or sounds, it was in what it taught. It didn't just trap people, it forced them to reflect, to navigate confusion, to face consequences. Those who entered expecting a joke left with a story, a lesson, or a laugh. Adults chuckled when they got sprayed or heard their voices echoed back in odd loops. Kids ran through, fearless, turning dead ends into adventures. Some neighbors, like Lisa and Adam, found something deeper, a connection, a moment of joy in a world that often felt too rigid. The maze was alive, always shifting, always offering a challenge or a reward. It had rooted itself in the heart of Willow Creek, and no one, not even Karen, could tear it down. I hadn't planned for any of this. It started with anger, a need to protect my backyard from entitled trespassers who thought rules didn't apply to them. I just wanted peace, a chance to tend Ellen's irises, and watch the koi without scooters or dog crap ruining the moment. But the maze became something bigger, a mirror that showed people who they were. Karen saw her arrogance reflected in its loops, her control slipping with every wrong turn. The neighborhood saw a chance to rebuild, to laugh, to come together without fear of HOA fines. And I saw myself not just a widower fighting for his land, but a man who could turn pain into purpose. The final touch came on a quiet evening as I sat on the stone bench in the maze's center. The oak tree above cast a cool shade, its leaves rustling in the breeze. I'd carved the bench's message myself, chiseling each letter with care. Respect is the only real shortcut. It wasn't a quote I'd found online, though neighbors assumed it was. It was mine, born from months of frustration, planning, and triumph. It was a reminder that shortcuts, whether through someone's yard or through life, come at a cost if they bypass respect. Karen had learned that the hard way, and the maze made sure everyone else got the memo. As I looked out over the hedges, their fairy lights twinkling against the dusk, I felt a peace I hadn't known since Ellen's death. The maze wasn't just a victory over Karen, it was a tribute to what we'd built together, me with my blueprints, Ellen with her love of gardens and whimsy. It was a place where her memory lived, not in broken gnomes, but in the laughter of kids, the gratitude of neighbors, the quiet moments when someone sat on that bench and thought about what mattered. I'd fought for my land, but I'd gained something more, a legacy that outlasted the fight. Willow Creek would never be the same, and neither would I. The maze stood as a beacon, a challenge, a story etched in greenery and grit. It whispered to anyone who dared enter, you can't outrun respect, but you can find your way through if you're willing to learn. And as the victory chime rang out, clear and bright, I knew this wasn't the end. It was a beginning, a reminder that imagination, patience, and a well-placed sprinkler could rewrite any game, no matter the odds. So here's to the maze, to the neighbors who run it, and to the Karens of the world who'll never find their way out. Respect the path, or the path will respect you right back, lavender spray and all.